Long before the sun rose over the mountains of Montana, Elias Carter was already awake. He pulled on his faded flannel shirt, worn jeans, old work boots, and weather-beaten cowboy hat. His small wooden cabin stood alone on the edge of town, surrounded by towering pine trees and rugged hills. The cabin was old and rough, but Elias never complained. He simply picked up his rusty pickaxe and shovel and began the long walk to the abandoned gold mine. People in town had watched him make that same journey every morning for more than 30 years. To them, he was nothing more than an old fool chasing a dream that had died decades ago. As Elias walked along the dusty road, pickup trucks drove past him. One of the drivers slowed down and laughed. "There goes old Gold Carter again." Another man leaned out the window. 30 years of digging, and he's still poorer than everyone else. The truck sped away as laughter echoed through the mountain road. Elias didn't even look back. He smiled quietly and continued walking. Hours later, deep inside the dark mine, the sound of metal striking rock echoed through the tunnels. Clang! 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 Other miners had already packed their equipment. "I'm done," one miner said. "This mountain has nothing left." Another nodded. "Anyone still digging here is wasting his life." The men left. Elias stayed. He carefully studied the rock before swinging his pickaxe again. Clang! A tiny sparkle appeared inside the cracked stone. Elias smiled. He gently removed several tiny gold nuggets and slipped them into a small leather pouch hidden inside his shirt. "One piece at a time," he whispered. By evening, Elias returned to town carrying only his empty tools. The people saw empty buckets and assumed he had found nothing. Outside the general store, Jack Turner spotted him. Jack was one of the richest ranch owners in Montana. His expensive cowboy boots, polished truck, and large ranch made him the envy of the town. He laughed loudly. "Well, look who's back. Old Gold Carter." Everyone turned toward Elias. Tom Walker joined in. "Tell us, Elias. Did the mountain finally pay you today?" The crowd laughed. Elias remained silent. A group of teenagers began pretending to swing imaginary pickaxes. "I'm Elias," one shouted. "I've been digging for 30 years. The others burst into laughter. Even Mayor Robert Hayes walked over. "Elias," the mayor said kindly, "you've spent most of your life inside that mountain. Maybe it's time to accept that there's nothing left." Elias looked toward the distant mountains. "The mountain hasn't told me to stop," he replied calmly. Without another word, he continued walking. Across the street, Sarah Miller stepped out of her diner carrying a paper bag. "Elias." He turned. "You forgot lunch again." She handed him a sandwich and a bottle of water. "Thank you, Sarah." She smiled. "I don't know what keeps you going, but I hope one day people understand." "They will," Elias answered softly. Jack overheard and laughed. "Understand what?" "How to stay broke for 30 years." The crowd erupted in laughter again. Elias never answered. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, he slowly walked toward his lonely cabin at the edge of town. He paused on the porch and looked back at the lights of the town where everyone believed they knew his story. Then he quietly smiled. "They only see what I choose to show them," he whispered. He opened the old wooden door, stepped inside, and locked it behind him. Outside, the town believed Elias Carter was the poorest man in Montana. Inside that cabin, a secret waited that would one day leave the entire world speechless. The old wooden door clicked shut. For a few moments, Elias Carter stood silently inside his cabin, listening. Outside, the wind rustled through the pine trees. No footsteps. No voices. No curious neighbors. The cabin looked exactly as everyone in town imagined it would. A rusty wood stove stood in one corner. The furniture was old and patched together. The walls were faded, and the floorboards creaked with every step. Anyone who entered would think Elias owned almost nothing. He slowly walked to an old bookshelf covered with dusty books and an antique lantern. Reaching behind the shelf, he pressed a hidden iron lever. A deep rumble echoed beneath the floor. The bookshelf slowly slid to one side, revealing a narrow staircase leading underground. Elias picked up the lantern and descended the stairs. When he reached the bottom, he unlocked a heavy steel door with an old brass key that never left his neck. The door swung open. Rows upon rows of wooden shelves stretched across the underground chamber. On every shelf were neatly stacked bars of pure gold, leather bags filled with gold nuggets, and sealed wooden chests overflowing with glittering treasure. The room glowed like a second sunrise. Elias walked slowly through the vault, running his hand across one of the gold bars. "This mountain never failed me," he said quietly. For more than 30 years, he had never sold a single ounce. Every tiny piece of gold he mined had been brought here, cleaned, weighed, labeled, and stored. He never spent money to impress anyone. He never bought a new truck. He never built a large house. He wanted no attention. Only patience. He opened a leather notebook lying on a workbench. Every page contained careful records. Year 1. Weight collected. Storage location. Purity. Estimated value. The entries continued year after year, filling dozens of pages. Everything was organized with remarkable precision. Elias smiled as he closed the notebook. "They called me foolish," he whispered. "But they never asked why I kept digging." The next morning, he returned to the mountain before sunrise. As always, Jack Turner was fueling his shiny black pickup truck when he saw Elias walking by. Jack laughed loudly. "There he goes again. Somebody tell him the gold rush ended over 100 years ago." Tom Walker shook his head. If hard work made people rich, Elias would own the whole state. Several townspeople laughed. Elias simply tipped his hat. "Morning." Jack called after him. "Morning? That's all you've got?" Elias kept walking. His silence irritated Jack even more. Deep inside the mine, Elias found another promising vein hidden beneath solid rock. Hour after hour, he worked carefully, refusing to rush. By sunset, another handful of beautiful gold nuggets rested in his leather pouch. Back at the cabin, he descended into the hidden vault once more. He poured the fresh nuggets onto a workbench, washed away the dirt, weighed them, recorded the amount in his notebook, and placed them inside another labeled chest. The vault had become more than a hiding place. It was the reward for 3 decades of discipline. As Elias closed the heavy steel door, he looked around the room one last time. "The time isn't right," he said softly. "But it's getting closer." Far above him, the people of Montana slept peacefully, convinced that Elias Carter was still the poorest man in town. None of them knew that beneath an old cabin, hidden under their very feet, rested a fortune beyond imagination, one that would soon change history forever. Winter arrived in the mountains of Montana. Snow covered the old mining trails, and freezing winds swept through the town. Most of the remaining miners packed away their tools until spring. But not Elias Carter. Before dawn every morning, he wrapped himself in a heavy coat, picked up his lantern and pickaxe, and climbed the icy mountain as he had done for more than 30 years. People watched from their warm homes and shook their heads. "That old man has lost his mind," one neighbor said. "He's going to die chasing rocks," another replied. The rumors spread through town, but Elias never heard them. His focus remained on the mountain. One afternoon, Jack Turner was hosting a barbecue on his ranch. Ranchers, business owners, and local officials gathered to celebrate another successful year. As laughter filled the yard, Jack noticed Elias walking down the road with his tools. He smirked. Well, everyone, our favorite millionaire just showed up. The guests burst into laughter. Jack raised his glass. Elias. Come over here. Elias stopped at the gate. Jack reached into his pocket, pulled out a $5 bill, and held it in the air. Take this. It's probably more money than you've made all month. The crowd laughed even harder. Tom Walker added, maybe you can retire now. Some people clapped and cheered. Elias looked at the money, then looked at Jack. He smiled politely. Keep it. Jack frowned. Pride doesn't buy dinner. Elias tipped his hat. No, but patience can buy much more. Without another word, he walked away. The laughter slowly faded as everyone watched him disappear down the snowy road. That evening, Sarah Miller waited for Elias inside her diner. She poured him a cup of hot coffee and placed a bowl of homemade beef stew on the table. You don't have to pay, she said. Elias smiled. You've helped me for years. Sarah sat across from him. I've always wanted to ask you something. What is it? After everything they've said, after all the humiliation, why do you keep going? Elias stirred his coffee slowly. Because I stopped living for other people's opinions a long time ago. Sarah looked at him quietly. One day, Elias continued, people will understand that success is often invisible, until it's impossible to ignore. Sarah smiled, though she still didn't fully understand what he meant. The next morning, Elias returned to the mine. Deep inside one of the oldest tunnels, his pickaxe struck something different. Clang! The sound echoed through the cavern. He cleared away loose rock and froze. Running through the stone was the thickest vein of gold he had ever seen. It stretched across the wall like a river of sunlight trapped beneath the earth. Elias closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He didn't shout. He didn't celebrate. Instead, he whispered, "Thank you." For weeks, he carefully extracted the gold, taking only what he could safely carry each day. He knew that greed could destroy everything he had worked for. Night after night, he added the newly mined gold to the hidden vault beneath his cabin. The shelves that had once seemed enormous were now nearly full. One evening, Elias stood in the center of the vault, looking around at the countless gold bars and chests. He opened his notebook and carefully calculated the total value. After several minutes, he closed the book and smiled. For the first time in 30 years, he said softly, "I have enough." He looked at his old pickaxe leaning against the wall. Its wooden handle was cracked. Its steel head was worn smooth from decades of work. He picked it up gently. "You've served me well, old friend." Elias knew that the next sunrise would be different. After more than 30 years of mining, he had finally made the decision that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who had ever laughed at him. Tomorrow, he would walk into town without his pickaxe. The next morning, the streets of the small Montana town were unusually quiet. People looked up as Elias Carter stepped out of his cabin. For the first time in more than 30 years, his shoulder was empty. No pickaxe. No shovel. No lantern. He simply wore a clean flannel shirt, his old cowboy hat, and a calm smile. As he walked through town, heads began to turn. Jack Turner noticed him first. He laughed and nudged Tom Walker. "Look at that." The old man finally came to his senses. Tom grinned. "I guess the mountain finally beat him." They walked over to Elias. "So," Jack said with a smirk, "did you finally realize you've wasted half your life?" Elias looked at him with the same peaceful expression he always wore. "I realized my work there is finished." Jack burst into laughter. "Finished? More like you finally gave up." A small crowd gathered around them. Someone shouted, "What's next, Elias? Looking for a job?" Another person added, "You can always sweep the floors at my garage." The crowd laughed. Elias simply tipped his hat. "Have a good day." He walked away without another word. Jack shook his head. "I've never met a man who enjoys being embarrassed." That afternoon, Elias drove somewhere no one had ever seen him go before. Instead of heading toward the mine, he drove several hours to a large city. He entered a respected precious metals trading company. The receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How may we help you?" "I'd like to speak with someone about selling gold." Moments later, he was escorted into a private office. A senior gold specialist entered the room. "My name is Daniel Brooks. How much gold are you planning to sell?" Elias reached into a small leather bag and placed a single gold bar on the desk. Daniel's smile faded into surprise. He picked it up carefully. "This is exceptionally pure." He tested it with professional equipment. After several minutes, he looked back at Elias. "Where did you get this?" "I mined it." Daniel stared at him. "How many more do you have?" Elias answered calmly. "Enough." Daniel smiled politely. "Mr. Carter, people usually say that when they have 2 or 3 bars." Elias looked him in the eyes. "I didn't say a few. I said enough." The following morning, Daniel arrived at Elias's cabin with 2 security experts and an armored transport team. When Elias opened the hidden vault beneath his cabin, every visitor stood frozen. One security officer removed his glasses in disbelief. Another slowly whispered, "My God!" Daniel walked through the underground chamber. Shelf after shelf. Chest after chest. Gold bars stacked almost to the ceiling. Leather bags overflowing with gold nuggets. Detailed records dating back more than 30 years. He turned toward Elias. "How long has all of this been here?" 32 years. "You never sold any of it?" "Not 1 ounce." Daniel stood speechless. Finally, he extended his hand. "Mr. Carter, this is one of the largest privately owned collections of natural gold I've ever seen." Elias shook his hand. "I believe it's time the world knew." Outside, armored trucks quietly loaded the first shipment. None of the people in town noticed. Jack Turner drove past the cabin and chuckled when he saw the vehicles in the distance. "Probably hauling away junk from that old shack," he joked. Tom laughed. "About time." Neither of them bothered to stop. Neither of them realized they had just driven past a fortune worth billions of dollars. As the last truck pulled away, Elias stood on his porch and watched it disappear down the mountain road. He smiled, not because he had become wealthy, but because the years of silence, sacrifice, and perseverance were finally about to bear fruit. The chapter everyone had laughed at was over. A new chapter had begun. And before long, the entire world would know the name Elias Carter. 3 months passed. The quiet mining town in Montana carried on as usual. Jack Turner still owned the largest ranch. Tom Walker still spent his mornings at the local cafe, and the townspeople still believed Elias Carter had quietly retired after finally admitting defeat. No one had seen much of Elias since he stopped mining. Rumors spread through town. "I heard he moved away. Maybe he sold his cabin. I bet he's living with relatives." No one knew the truth. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Elias was meeting with investors, refinery owners, and precious metals experts. Every gold bar from his hidden vault had been authenticated, weighed, and legally documented. The purity of the gold astonished industry professionals. His carefully kept records proved that every ounce had been mined over more than 3 decades. Within weeks, Elias founded Carter Gold Holdings, a company dedicated to selling responsibly sourced gold and investing in mining technology. Financial institutions competed for the chance to work with him, and his business expanded rapidly across the United States. News channels began reporting on the mysterious former miner from Montana. They called him the hidden gold miner. One morning, Sarah Miller switched on the television inside her diner. The news anchor appeared on the screen. An extraordinary story is capturing the nation's attention. Elias Carter, a retired miner from Montana, has revealed one of the largest privately accumulated collections of gold ever documented. Experts estimate the value of his holdings in the billions of dollars. Sarah dropped the coffee pot she was holding. It can't be. Customers turned toward the television in disbelief. The screen showed Elias, dressed in a tailored suit, calmly answering reporters' questions. He looked exactly the same, only his clothes had changed. Across town, Jack Turner was watching the same broadcast from his ranch. He laughed at first. "There's no way that's our Elias." The reporter continued. "Mr. Carter has become one of the wealthiest self-made entrepreneurs in the country after decades of quietly storing the gold he mined instead of selling it." Jack's smile vanished. Tom, who had been standing beside him, stared at the screen with his mouth open. "No, that's impossible." The report showed images of the underground vault beneath Elias's cabin. Rows of gold bars. Wooden chests filled with nuggets. Shelves stretching farther than the cameras could capture. Jack slowly sat down. For the first time in years. He had nothing to say. A week later, luxury SUVs rolled into the small Montana town. Reporters, photographers, and television crews filled the streets. The same people who had once ignored Elias now wanted interviews. His old cabin became a place people traveled across the country to see. When Elias finally returned to town, he wasn't driving a flashy sports car. He arrived in a simple black pickup truck. The townspeople gathered around in silence. No one laughed. No one whispered. Jack stepped forward, removed his cowboy hat, and lowered his head. "Elias. I owe you an apology." Elias looked at him quietly. "For years, I mocked you. I judged you by what I saw instead of who you were. I was wrong." Tom stepped forward as well. "So was I." The crowd stood silently, ashamed of the way they had treated him. After a long pause, Elias smiled. "I accepted your words years ago." Jack looked confused. "What do you mean?" "When people laughed at me, I had two choices. I could spend my life proving them wrong, or spend my life building the future I believed in." He looked around at the crowd. "I chose the second." No one spoke. The words settled deeply into every heart. Then Sarah walked forward. "I always believed there was something special about you." Elias smiled warmly. "And I'll never forget your kindness." A few months later, Elias announced the creation of the Carter Foundation, donating millions of dollars to build schools, modern hospitals, and trade training centers throughout Montana. He also created scholarships for young people who wanted to study geology, engineering, and mining. At the dedication of the town's new community center, Mayor Robert Hayes addressed the crowd. "We once thought Elias Carter was the poorest man in this town." He paused and looked toward Elias. "The truth is, he was the richest among us long before he had money. His greatest wealth was his patience, his discipline, and his unwavering belief in his purpose." The audience rose to their feet in a long-standing ovation. Elias simply smiled. He had never dug for applause. He had dug because he believed in tomorrow. And in the end, tomorrow had rewarded him beyond anything the world could have imagined.